let me just say, to kind of bring a little closure to the last discussion before we move on, that in the 25 years that I worked in New York City public schools and worked in the teachers union, it was always the case that discussions about race were necessary and important discussions, but it was also important that we created safe places in which they could happen, because if those discussions begin with people feeling under attack, they generally don't end well. And so how we frame those discussions and how we have them not as things which are one-up, but actually embed them in the work that we do as educators, I think is very important. So the panel that we have before us has a number of very distinguished folks to actually begin to talk about some of these tools that we need in our toolkit. We've been talking, I think it's been a theme from Pedro and Randy's speech, that the problem that we have is precisely that in many schools and in many classrooms, the feeling is that there's only one tool, which is that of suspension, that of exclusion, and that it's important to have a full set of tools in the toolkit to deal with the issues we have before us. The panel will begin with David Osher, who is a vice president at the American Institute for Research, and it has worked particularly in the field of health and social development. And David is going to provide us with an overview of what the world of research tells us in terms of effective programs. We are then going to move on to Tom Roderick, who is executive director of the Morningside Center for Teaching Responsibility, which is the leading provider of social and emotional learning in New York City. And Tom brings a wealth of experience to this, having worked in this field for more than 30 years, and he is going to particularly focus in on peer mediation programs. And then we will finish with Terri Wright, who is the director of the Center for School Health and Education at the public, this is a long title, of Public Health Policy and Practice at the American Public Health Association. And Terri has, again, a great deal of experience in the field of public health, and in particularly around social and emotional learning in our schools. And so what we will do with this panel is we will actually go through all three presentations, and then we will open it up for discussion. So David will begin.
All right, let's see if I can reach here, and I can. Okay, and can this? Okay, we're going to work
I'll do
from
it
here.
for you. Just
all
tell
right.
me
Well,
when you need it.
In this case, it's animated. You don't want me to be controlling. Okay, so let me start by thanking Shankar and really saying ditto, 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 as Randy said, to both Randy and to Pedro and to everybody else, but also I think to the really important points that Leo's making. That one of the centers that I lead is doing a series of webinars in support of school discipline, and we're doing another one on Thursday. And I know that Robert Murphy from Maryland is going to be one of the people talking. And one of the things he's going to be talking about is the fact that there's a difference between compliance and transformation. And I think that on the one hand, and I say this as a parent who saw my black son in manacles when he was 9 years old, and it does stay with me, that we want to stop bad things no matter what, and good people can do bad things. And on the other hand, people have to be involved, as we always know, in changing things. And people go into schools and go into other work because they want to do good things and they have the capacity, so we have to develop ways of harnessing them. I want to talk, I can give you programs for everything I want to talk about, but I think we have programitis. And I think it's really important to know that you may want programs, you may want strategies, but the real thing that we have to be able to do is to find ways that people can do things that can be done easily, that they can master, and that they can really integrate into their practice. It's not just a set of programs. Okay, so let me start with some keys to safe and supportive and successful schools. One, no matter what, is people go to schools to learn, and an academic focus is really important. A second is that it's very important not only to have that focus, but to provide support for students and faculty to meet high academic and behavioral standards. For that, there have to be strong conditions for teaching and learning. Speak to Jillian, because they're now trying to survey staff on conditions for teaching as well as students on conditions for learning. And there has to be strong academic and social emotional learning. So for example, you know that word test you had, COAS, very hard? That's a Stroop test. And what we know from evidence of a program that is being done in Cleveland, PATHS, is actually you can change kid performance on Stroop tests by really doing good social and emotional learning. I suspect you can do the same thing for adults. Okay, so we are dealing with things that are that are very hard to change. I deal with my racism every day. You don't have to use that word, but I do. I know how the prejudice comes in, and you have to combat it. But these are hard to change in our society, but the good news is we can change. The good news is we really can grow, and we can change together. That what we want is authoritative leadership and discipline. And I start with authoritative because if we want teachers to exhibit authoritative discipline, and we know that that can work much better, there's really interesting work on that coming from Dewey Cornell in Virginia and Ann Gregory. But they have to have principals who are authoritative, who don't come in and say, do this. And those principles have to work for superintendents who are authoritative. And what I mean by that is providing people with some structure, but also providing people with autonomy and ownership so that they can buy in and understand. And it's not being tough, it's being clear and supportive and helping people own and engage what's happening. That people need a sense of efficacy and accountability for all students. And students, family, and staff need to be engaged. And you know the word growth mindset you've heard about for academics and students? Well, they're also bad for students in social emotional competencies. I'm impulsive, but I can learn to control my impulsivity. That's a growth mindset. It's for teachers to look at those poor kids and not say, those poor kids can't succeed, but can succeed. It's for parents struggling with things to say that I think that if we do things right, I can make a difference for my kid. That things are, to use the word of science, malleable. We can change things. Cultural competence and cultural responsiveness. One of the things that I like still about that word cultural competence is it's about the fact that maybe I can't deal with my bias, but I can be competent. I can actually learn to control it. Now, I want to eradicate it, but even if I can't, I'm a professional, and I can do things so that I can involve systems to thinking. But it's also important to be responsive. Effective collaboration and coordination between and among everybody. I'm using the stakeholder word because it's shorthand, but it's everyone, both in the school, but also between the school and the district and school district and community and parents. And an approach to continuous quality improvement, a problem-solving approach. And what I like about the new manual on restorative practice that the AFT put out is it also talks about problem-solving in terms of looking at student data. Because the key to problem-solving is not being defensive and not feeling you can't do something, but to really interrogate and say, so what's behind this behavior? How can I make a difference? And a three-tiered approach to promoting, building assets in people so they can succeed. Helping teachers as well as students and other staff developing their social and emotional competency. We all need to get better. I work on it all the time. I'm still not there. Preventing bad things from happening, but also intervening at the levels that people need. I have 5 minutes left? No, I just used 5 minutes. Good, okay. All right. Let me add here that some people are now talking in a very interesting way about fortified environments. And And that's to really address what people have identified as truly disadvantaged schools, schools where there are a large number of kids who really struggle with the adversities that may be related to poverty, and I would add prejudice and oppression, and to address trauma. And the key here is, if we're talking about 3 tiers, what you need in Scarsdale at the foundation is not what you need in the South Bronx. Okay, if I know that I'm serving lots of kids who have high levels of need, I don't have to wait to find out that they do and then spend more money. I have to build in a foundation that works. Because it's cheaper, it also helps people be more effective. So let me talk about what these things mean from a student experience. Connection, connection, connection. I wrote this before. That's the real answer. There's a reason we keep on saying that. You know, when I was about to start consulting with Chicago many years ago, they said, if you were a principal for 1 year, what would you do? And I said, you only mean 1 year? That's not enough time. They said, yeah. Then I'd focus on connectedness, because you can do it. And it's the key to everything else. Jim Comer says the connection is to education like real estate, location is to real estate. You can't get anywhere without it. You know, kids experience academic engagement, being excited, but also experiencing success. Having transitions supported when I need them. Experiencing positive relationships with the adults as well as my peers. That interactions that I experience are caring, that people care about me, my fellow students, but my teachers and other adults. Experiencing social emotional learning. What we talked about in the last session is people come into school often already not having some things that they need in order to succeed. How do we make sure we enable kids to have the skills that can help them own their discipline and be successful as students? Positive interactions with pro-social, not antisocial peers, and experiencing restorative practices, we've heard, and authoritative discipline. Again, it's not that you can run rampant. It's not that, this is not Summerhill. I used to think Summerhill was good, but on the other hand, this is not Stalag 17. This is not, this is the way it's going to go, because remember what it's like to be an adolescent. If someone tells you that, you go the opposite way. Okay, good, okay. And experiencing service and supports. So very quickly, what we want, and I want to give you a number of boxes. We want a box that includes providing connection, attachment, trust, care, respect, and inclusion, the social emotional learning and support that I talked about, using positive behavioral approaches and supports to prevent bad things happening, and really having effective pedagogies that involve engagement and build upon student motivation. And where we want to intervene if we have kids who are levels of need, it's not just at the kid, but at the people who are most close to them. Their parents we need support, their teachers may need support, their friends, their classroom. We have to work in a school environment as well. Someone asked about class size. Class size, I checked on my Google, is related to discipline, but so is school size. Both of those are important. And we have to really think about what's happening in the community. Kids coming into school wired or scared, very anxious because of the fact that they've had to go through combat zones, are not kids ready to learn. Okay, so we're going to jump ahead and work on 3 levels. Bing, bing, bing. More importantly, I want to end with 2 equations for you, okay? One, when you're thinking about interventions, what you want to say is, what works with what kinds of kids and what kinds of staff in what setting when you do what and when you provide what type of support. Those are your whats. System 2 thinking. And then I want to give you an equation that I'm working on right now with some other colleagues. Readiness to do this stuff is MC squared. M being motivation, C being capacity, and it's squared. So now let's unpack it. Motivation includes the fact that you've heard about return on investments. Everyone has them. If a teacher's going to invest in something emotionally, what's the return for me? And this is associative. You don't usually calculate it out, even though we want to make it system-like. It's the same for a principal, but it's the same for a parent, it's the same for a kid. What's going to be the return? And people need to see returns early enough so that they can play in the game. Capacity. Capacity involves both people's technical capacity, but also their social and emotional capacity. But those, I use that word capacity, and I should, right now I want to correct myself, because it's my social emotional competence and my technical competence, because it's only when those are in environments, conditions that support me, that I have capacity. So I end saying, as you hear about important programs and approaches and supports, the issue is not just whether they exist, they do. The issue is how can we do them well, how can we help people do them easily, and that involves the type of selection calculus I gave you, what works with whom, et cetera, and also thinking about how we build that readiness. R equals MC squared.
Thank you.
Hi. We're in the 9th inning stretch, right? Not just the 7th inning. I was very struck by the story from the woman in the Baltimore schools who talked about how the policies there seem to go overnight from zero tolerance to no suspensions whatsoever. I think that's a real danger. We're in a time of opportunity where we could have a real productive conversation about school discipline. And it's the first time we've had that opportunity for a number of years. The danger is that it gets short-circuited and the pendulum swings back the other way, and that there aren't the resources or the tools for people to actually implement alternatives. And so that's what I'm going to speak to today. I'm going to speak to some work we're doing in New York City that I think offers a lot of promise as an alternative to these ineffective and biased discipline policies. Just a little background first. My organization, Morningside Center, has partnered with the New York City Public Schools for 30-some years. We have used whole school approaches, not just sort of isolated programs. We have seen the work, social emotional learning, transform schools. However, in general, our successes have been more at the elementary level than at the secondary level. And, you know, I could go into the reasons for that, but I won't. Because during the past 3 years, we've been partnering with the New York Department of Ed's Office of Safety and Youth Development to implement a promising strategy which I'll call restorative practices. And we have been implementing restorative practices in about 50 schools so far. And I want to share with you sort of how we think about restorative practices, what we've been doing, and what we've been learning. For starters, notice that I said restorative practices, not restorative justice. Restorative justice is a term that comes out of the criminal justice system, and that's where we think it should stay, right? We are educators, right? And how do we define restorative practices? Restorative practices seek to build community, strengthen relationships, and promote good behavior through participatory learning and decision-making. We are, after all, educators. We're about learning. And we also want to reclaim the word discipline. It's become associated with punishment, but the root of discipline is a Latin word, disciplina, that actually means pupil, or it means teaching. So restorative practices are about teaching and learning. And in schools that embrace restorative practices, misbehavior is a teachable moment. It's an opportunity for learning, and that's the way we see it. So, what are restorative practices? There's a continuum, right? So on the one hand, you have restorative circles, we call them. And we've been implementing, as I said, we've been implementing restorative circles in about 50 schools so far over the last 3 years, about to expand to more schools. And restorative circles build community and student skills, right? And that's where you need to start. The term restorative is interesting. You can't restore something that you don't have, right? So first you want to build community, strengthen community, and that's what restorative circles do. You have young people sit in a circle. You have a keeper of the circle who would, in the beginning at least, be the adult, but that could change to a student as the students get more familiar with the process. You have a talking piece that goes around, and in a circle, sort of strictly done, it's not a discussion. I mean, of course, we're always sitting in circles, but in a restorative circle, the talking piece goes around on each question, and every student has an opportunity to speak if they want, or they can pass. And what tends to happen in a well-facilitated circle is that students feel safe enough to take risks and really share deeply with each other, and then that promotes understanding. And just give you an example, a circle that I was part of recently. It's a group of sixth grade girls. The circle was being run by the school guidance counselor at an after-school program that we run. She did an exercise with them where she put out on the centerpiece that's in the middle of the circle words with the names of feelings on them, right? So she had the girls, take turns going up and taking a feeling word, right? And then sort of going back to their seats, and then the talking piece went around for them to share why they had chosen that word. Well, the first girl shared that she was feeling sad because her grandfather had died, right, recently. And as the talking piece went around, other kids started sharing their losses. It was like her sharing triggered their sharing about the losses in their lives. This was a school in the West Farm section of the Bronx. By the time the talking piece went all the way around, everyone was in tears, remembering the losses in their lives. And when the talking piece went around again, kids said things like, "Oh, I didn't realize that anyone else felt the way I feel." Kids shared things about parents being incarcerated, or parents being in the hospital, or pets dying. I mean, it went the whole range. But it clearly promoted connection, relationships, empathy, understanding. So those are what we would call community building circles. A next level of the continuum, or a next place on the continuum, is when there are problems that come up. So that's where peer mediation might come in. Peer mediation is certainly a restorative practice, right? But you can use a circle, the format, the one I described with a talking piece and everything, to deal with the challenges that the group is facing. So, for instance, actually at the elementary level, saw a circle where books that the teacher had brought in were kind of disappearing, and she put that problem out to the group to solve, and the kids had learned a problem-solving process that they used to deal with that. So it's it's not some kind of egregious incident that's happened where harm has been done, but it's a problem of the group that can be dealt with through the circle process. The same way that peer mediation, deals with a conflict, but before the conflict has erupted into violence. Then, on the other end, so you've got the community building circles, the circles that address problems before they become bigger, and then you have the restorative, a formal restorative conference where you deal with situations where harm has been done. So that's the sort of range of ways we're using circles in the schools, and that's the way we think about restorative practices. So how are we doing this? Well, we're not just saying to the teachers, go and do it, right? We are giving them substantial training. They take part in a series of circles for 5 Saturdays, and then following the 5 Saturdays that they have experienced circles themselves and practiced conducting circles in small groups of adults, then they go to their school, then they start doing it in their schools, and we have staff developers who go in and coach them in doing that. And so we're making a substantial investment, and I have to give Connie Cuddle, who's here, who's the director of the Office of School and Youth Development, that she gets it. The teachers really need support in order to do this well. So what have we learned so far from doing this? Well, one of the things that we discovered was that even after the teachers had the 5 days of introductory course, you could call it, when they went back to their schools, they still were a bit lost about, yes, they could run a few circles, but where was this going? And so we created a curriculum for them to give them more sort of structure. And the other problem we found was that in some cases the students were not, didn't have enough sort of social emotional skills to get the most from a circle. So we created a curriculum that gives the teachers more structure. It has units, it's a skill building curriculum, right? And it gives the students the skills they need to make the best use of circles. So we're building in the supports that the teachers need. The next step is going to be to involve the principal and the administration more, because you can't parachute circles into a school where the culture is not conducive, right? So you need to get the school involved in rethinking their discipline policies. You can't have deans acting in a punitive way while you have teachers over here trying to create a whole different way of dealing with community building and behavior. So it's a challenge to change school culture. We have had some successes with that so far. It's about the principal engaging the staff of the school in a conversation about discipline. I mean, people have been doing it the other way, using punitive practices, using zero tolerance as their sort of guiding metaphor for a long time. That's not going to change overnight, and the way it changes is for a school to invest time in bringing teachers together with the administration if it's a big school, you need to do that through a committee, perhaps, but you need to have that dialogue. And we have, processes and tools for having a productive dialogue in that way. So in summary, this restorative circle approach has these elements to it as it's developed over these 3 years in our work in New York City. First of all, that they're about building community. They're about connecting students with each other in very specific ways. It's about building students and teachers' skills. And when I talk about skills, I'm talking about listening. I'm talking about understanding and managing feelings, the basic social emotional skills. I'm talking about assertiveness, being able to put yourself out there in a strong but not a mean way, and problem solving. So it's about building community, it's about building skills, it's about providing opportunities for reflection. So if the kids are learning skills, they know they have options when their anger gets triggered, for example. Then if a child loses it, a student loses it, then you can say to them, did you forget, what you learned about how you could manage your anger? Let's see if you could do better next time. It's about not pushing people out, but keeping them in and holding them responsible. That's what the restorative approaches are about, and the restorative conferences are about. Had a situation in a school where a kid took a picture of another kid on the toilet and put it on Facebook page, right? So obviously that a suspension was mandated in that case, but then the question was, what happened when that child came back? Well, they had, a restorative conference that gave the child re-entry, saying, we love you, but you got to get your act together. You must not do this again. Got the kid to understand what impact it had but it was in the context of, so it was authoritative, but it was caring at the same time. Finally, we have to give teachers and school staff the tools they need to do this, and to do it well. And that's going to be the challenge, to get the resources to do that. And also to do it in a way that we keep learning how to do it better. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
So I get to bring up the rear. Oh my goodness gracious.
Think of it as
What
a
a
cleanup.
awkward position to be in. Let's see here. I have this one here, and I'm not a Mac user, so I'm going to stay away from it. I'm an old-fashioned PC user. So, good evening, and thank you for hanging around. Hopefully, I'm coming from a very different perspective, and so hopefully it will sort of shake up the brain cells a little bit. My name is Terri Wright, and I'm the director of the Center for School Health and Education at the American Public Health Association, not far from here, also known as APHA. And the center, I just want to give you a brief background, was established in 2010, and the focus of the center is on dropout prevention as a public health priority. I don't know how many of you are aware of that, but in the public health world, dropout prevention has been identified in a number of different very strategic places as a public health priority. At the American Public Health Association, we have a policy that focuses on dropout prevention and partnering with education and business to make that happen. Also, Healthy People 2020, which comes out of the Department of Health and Human Services and is the nation's landmark document, policy document, guiding a number of people in the health world around health objectives for the decade. It comes out every decade. And for the first time, there is an objective that specifically speaks to ninth graders graduating on time in 4 years, which is monumental. It says that we in the health world have a responsibility for partnering with people in the education world and assuring that young people graduate in 4 years once they enter ninth grade. So why? Why is this important to us in the health world? Well, there's a number of reasons. First of all, dropouts are more likely to suffer from chronic illnesses, such as cardiovascular diseases, cancer, infections, lung diseases, and diabetes. Dropouts earn 41% less income than someone with a high school diploma. Dropouts experience a shorter life expectancy. They're 28% less likely to have health insurance coverage than college graduates, and they are less likely to have social conditions that promote health as an adult. So we have some compelling reasons why education and graduation matters to us in the health world. And in fact, we see it as two sides of the same coin, particularly for the K-12 population. Health and education go hand in hand. I hope by the time I'm done, I can show you how that works. Here are some reasons why kids do poorly in school. And while you may not see it in these terms, I'm going to show you how it does manifest in the education environment. One of the major reasons are untreated health conditions such as asthma and vision that have not been diagnosed and therefore have not been treated. They interfere with kids' ability to sleep at night and therefore get to school on time and function once they get to school. And certainly vision, and I'm not just talking about near and short-sightedness, although that is highly prevalent, particularly in urban minority youth. I'm trying to stay away from some of the statistics, but I can give you the statistics if you like it. But also deeper vision problems that are undiagnosed and frustrate young people and compromise their ability to learn. Aggression and violence, I don't need to speak to that. I'm sure you're very much aware of the issues around aggression and school and community violence, as well as hunger, food insecurity, and homelessness, many social issues that we don't think about in terms of health or education, but when you peel back the layers, you find absolutely that hunger, food insecurity, and whether I have a home to go to at the end of the school day are absolute reasons why young people do not achieve well in school. And then teen pregnancy, whether it be having a baby or having to support a baby, affects both male and females. And then to break it down a little bit further, this is the dropout data. About 55% are females, 45% males, and these are the top 5 reasons why young people drop out of school that has been demonstrated in the literature. Disciplinary issues, which we have spent the majority of today talking about, having to seek income for young men, poor academic performance, and then end up being pulled out or pushed out of school, absenteeism and getting too far behind and can't catch up, and then disengagement, school disengagement. For females, having a teen pregnancy or having to parent or provide care for adults in their family, like grandparents and adults or aunts and what have you, particularly in certain racial and ethnic communities, you find caregiving a huge issue. Having to seek income and also being harassed in school or on their way to school. So our role at the center is advancing school-based health care as a comprehensive strategy for preventing school dropout and improving graduation rates for the K-12 population. And so why do we say school-based health centers? Because school-based health centers address with the broad social circumstances that are associated with educational success, for example, poverty, school, as well as social experiences associated with graduation, like school violence. They deal with the behaviors around risky behaviors and dangerous health outcomes associated, particularly with adolescents, and they remove the geographic financial barriers to physical, mental, and oral health care. I invite you, you have a very rich packet of information and articles that you received, and I invite you to the one up from Dr. Beverly Bradley about academic achievement and health behaviors. That's quite compelling about why we need to work together, because they are absolutely directly associated with one another. Trying to keep moving here. Just to give you a quick overview of school-based health centers, they provide quality, comprehensive physical, mental, and social health care and services that help students succeed in school and in life. They're located in or near a school facility. I heard Pedro talk about bringing the services. The resources have to be on site. And so school-based health centers, they are on site and are available in that way. They're usually organized through the school, community, and health provider relationships and staffed by qualified health professionals, a variety, nurse practitioners, physicians assistants, health educators, social workers, mental health therapists. The typical model is a nurse practitioner, a mental health therapist, and a medical assistant. It's your typical basic model of providing services in a school building. And they're focused on prevention, early identification, and treatment of medical and behavioral concerns on site that can interfere with the student's ability to learn. So what do we know about school-based health centers and about the evidence of school-based health centers on mental health and wellness? First of all, school-based health centers, and all of this is cited in the literature, school-based health centers attract the hard-to-reach population, especially racial minorities and males, and do a better job at getting them services such as mental health services, risk assessments, and early intervention. And adolescents were 10 to 21 times more likely to come to a school-based health center for mental health services than a community health center. Why? Because it's in the school and other kids are doing it too. So they destigmatize it and they make it accessible and available without regards to cost. Students, teachers, and parents who have a school-based health center rated academic expectations, school engagement, safety, and respect significantly higher than in schools without a school-based health center. They have found that the mere presence of a school-based health center positively impacts the overall school climate and the learning environment. Did I change it? I did that, okay. And some indicators of educational achievement, which are what are most important to this audience here. Users of school-based health centers decreased absenteeism by 50%, tardiness by 25%, increased their grade point averages, and a population of at most risk in terms of dropping out of school. African American males who use a school-based health center were 3 times more likely to stay in school. So we have compelling data that does a number of things. Number one, connects academic or educational achievement to health. And number two, that shows the difference that school-based health centers can make in school buildings with bringing the resources. Not that they work magic, I am not suggesting that, but they identify the issues that you're seeing in the classroom. They identify the issues, the issues that are underpinning what you see in the classroom, bring the resources into the school building, destigmatize using them, make them available, and the follow-up can happen as a part of the school team or the school personnel team. I invite you to consider this quote by our former Surgeon General, Dr. Jocelyn Elders. You can't educate people that are not healthy. You cannot educate them if they are not healthy. And we're talking about health broadly. We're not just talking about, oh, they have an ear infection or a sore throat. We're talking about, do they have a home to go to? We're talking about if they have asthma, is that asthma under control so they can sleep at night? Well, guess what? If they don't have electricity or the electricity is intermittent, they can't use the nebulizer that controls the asthma, and you see them as tardy, falling asleep, or absent. One of the three. And school-based health centers are able to dig deeper to those reasons behind the symptoms, as Pedro talked about this morning, and begin to remedy those and make the lives of teachers a little bit easier so that they can teach. They address those issues that come into the classroom that are beyond what teachers can do on a day-to-day basis. And we know in the public health world that you certainly can't keep people healthy if they're not educated. So that's our side of the equation and why we want to partner with education and educators. And finally, please stay connected. There's a number of articles in the packet, again, on school violence and how school-based health centers impact school violence as well as school climate. You should see health centers, school-based health centers as allies. We were talking about that earlier, to teachers and schools. By bringing those resources, they have a track record around school connectedness and, again, addressing the underlying issue in the school building. So I think that as a resource, that school-based health centers bring a tremendous amount to the table, and that your advocacy to bring that in, it's not an expense to the school because the providers are the ones who bear the expense, other than space in the school building. So think about it as a strategy as you try to address safe schools and orderly schools going forward. Thank you.
So I'd like to thank David, Tom, and Terry. It's not an easy task.
Last one of the day. Oh my gosh.
It's not an easy task.
Let's do it in 10 minutes.
Batting cleanup on a day like this. But I think the information that they provided us was very important. I think they did a good job of doing it. We can take a couple of questions. Yes.
I'll go to the microphone. My voice doesn't carry very well. Okay, to our last speaker, I'm going to throw you a softball. I know that you're from Michigan, and I have to believe you worked on creating the Michigan Comprehensive School Health Curriculum, and it is a model for the United States. The Michigan Comprehensive
Yes,
School. Would you address it just for a couple sentences so that people know it and they can go online and get it? Thank you.
Sure. Oh, I guess I can answer here, huh? I
Yeah.
don't know. Okay, so priority, is that what I push? What do I push? Oh, it's live. Okay, fine. Excuse me. Sorry, I didn't realize that. So your question was how was it developed?
How it was developed, what it contains, and how it.
Okay. All right, so what it does is looks at the whole school, is what it does. Not just the students and the teachers and other school personnel, but looks at the school environment, including the food. It's similar to the coordinated school health model. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but there's 8 components to it, where you're looking at the school environment, you're looking at physical activity, you look at the food in the school building. Someone spoke about the kids not eating the school. Oh, Pedro, I think it was, spoke about the kids not eating the school. It looks at all of the different elements that contribute to a healthy school environment, and an environment where young people can learn and the teachers can thrive and do what they love doing, teaching. And so it was created, and it also came as a part of CDC, Centers for Disease Control, helped to create the model and make it available by putting personnel in the State Department of Education and the State Department of Public Health. So that's a quick version of it. You can go online and find it. If you go to, you can go to Michigan's Department of Community Health, because they also have it there, Michigan Department of Education, as well as the Centers for Disease Control, all of which would have information about the model and the different components of the model and how you measure them and put together a strategic plan for improving the overall model. The other thing I just wanted to say, I wanted to reinforce the significance around what Pedro said about talking to young people to identify the solutions. And those models include young people, students, in identifying the solutions that are most relevant to the school, and even identifying the problem. One of the things we did last fall, or winter I should say, is talk with kids, inner city Detroit, and learn that one of the reasons why they're bringing weapons to school is because they fear for their lives on the way to school. Okay, they fear being raped. Young girls were telling us about knowing other girls who had been raped on the way to school, and so they feel like they have to carry mace, or they have to carry a knife, or and they try to hide it outside the school because they fear for their lives on their way to school. That's quite compelling, to carry a weapon. And so, but if we're not asking these young people, we're not really understanding what they're doing to protect themselves. So they could be an incredible source of information around what's going on in their world. Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Jim Bogdan. My question has to do with systems change, and it's for anyone. Do you all see much evidence of colleges of education adopting these things, and the U.S. Department of Education, with the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Act coming one of these years, is that going to be revised to reflect these things?
Okay. I was a dean 3 times, and one of the hardest things to change is curriculum, because faculty, in spite of their ideology, are very, very conservative when it involves holding on to what they have. At the same time, there are places that are trying to deal with this, and I think it is hugely important to really prepare people pre-service going in. That I think in the last few years of the Department of Education, they really are starting to get the issues we're talking about. I think this is very important. It's really happening. I think they're doing it at a point where they don't have a lot of resources and they have less capital to be involved. But if you look at the administration's plan, there's one more race to the top that's focusing on equity. The conversation that I had before relative to the notion of fortified environments has really gotten a lot of attention within the Department of Education. I think they really, that they are preparing for free use across the country, school climate surveys regarding how to get the voice of students, but also of teachers, of parents, and of other school staff regarding the school environment. This is really starting to happen. This is not easy, but I think the real issue is a sustained effort and using the moment that we are in. There is a window that has opened up to do this very, very tough work. And I think, as your question suggests, it's really a piece of a bigger piece. But you can't do school reform without addressing this. And in the same way, you can't address this without creating engaging environments and supportive schools and redeploying resources as well as getting resources.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. My name's Tanya Koken. For the most of the last 4 years, I've been working at the Atlantic Philanthropies with Kavitha Mediratta on our on school discipline reform, and so I'm just delighted to see this conversation happening. By teachers and among teachers. But I wanted to underscore one of the points that Terri was making about the benefits of school-based health centers. Some of my colleagues at Atlantic have been working on a demonstration project for the last number of years that it has funded school-based health centers in 16 school districts, or actually 16 schools across 4 school districts in the United States focused on middle schools. And one of the outcomes that was frankly unanticipated that we found in those districts is that suspension rates drop markedly by 25 to 40% as a result of the kind of services that Terry's talking about being available and integrated as part of a school health plan. The other thing that I wanted to mention, which is really, I think, food for thought, also connected to Terri's presentation when she says, you know, kids are coming to school, right, with some of these health issues, including violence and aggression. And I think that in addition to coming from communities that are themselves rife with aggression and students coming to school with fear for themselves, we also, I think, need to have a broader conversation about how what's happening in the criminal justice system, and by that I mean youth criminalization, a lot of stop and frisk, harassment of students, heavy surveillance of young people as they are outside on the street, plus harsh surveillance and control of students and school discipline. I think those two things together are quite toxic, and they're bringing into schools children who themselves are angry, right? And I think it accounts for some of both the microaggressions and the macroaggressions that we see in school. And as somebody who's been a criminal justice practitioner for most of my career, but I'm now at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice at CUNY doing some research on the impact of youth criminalization on student engagement and persistence. I think that we need more of a cross conversation, frankly, between educators and criminal justice people about sort of the wages, right, of on our children of growing up in an era of mass incarceration and heavy policing, and kind of what it's doing to overall mental health and psychic persistence and ability to engage in school. And I think the other point here, too, is that many of our children from high-poverty schools are themselves coming from homes where there is a parent who's incarcerated, right? And so that's why I think on your slide, Terri, when you show the reasons that girls are dropping out, one of the reasons they have caregiving responsibilities for their siblings is because there's so often,
that's right.
in so many of these households, a parent who is missing because they're incarcerated. So,
Thank you. Rod, I think you'll be the last question for the day.
Thank you. Rod Sherman from Plattsburgh, New York, a very rural upstate New York school district. When I say upstate, I'm talking about the Adirondack Mountain area. And I've learned a lot about the Shanker Institute. When you come here, there's always some takeaways that you can take back home. But today, I'm listening to a lot of things that deal with children of color. And I keep relating that to poverty. In our area, I think children of poverty suffer the same kinds of things. Am I correct in looking at that? This is in the same way that people in urban school districts are looking at children of color, the difficulties, and can I go back home and have these same kinds of discussions, but fill in the word poverty instead?
Well,
let me give you two separate answers. On the one hand, you know, the way in which implicit bias also relates to how we see people who are different and kids who are different and kids who come from poverty. And if we look at data on discipline, even within school systems, poor kids of color are maybe treated differently sometimes than others. At the same time, in places where race and class come together, there's been good studies, for example, the work that was done statewide in Texas that shows that even after you control for poverty, you still get the racial disparity. So I think you do have a take-home. And at the same time, the other take-home is that we still have to worry about color prejudice, ethnic prejudice, and so forth.
Thank you.
okay. Thank you very much. I think one good ending point for today would be, the other day we had a conversation and someone said, you need to figure out how to do all of this without resources. And you know, what that says to educators is you're telling us that we're the only ones who are actually treating this as a priority. You know, really, if we can find $500 million in this country between the US DOE and State Department of Education to pay for a new generation of standardized exams. We can find money to address the critical issues here. And so I think that is a very important takeaway, because, you know, teachers will always do whatever they can do with what they're given. You know, I've taught classes of 40 students. You do the best that you can, but if we as a country are serious about these issues, and if the people who reside in places of power in terms of educational policy making are serious about these issues, they will ensure that there are resources that actually make it possible to address them. Let me say that this is an unusual format for the Good School Seminar, that usually we just had people and presenters come from out of city, and it would all be private. But today we did this public session because we wanted to invite in other people who we thought might learn from it. Tomorrow we will resort back to our usual format with the teams from outside and the presenters, where we have those private conversations. But for those of you who just came for the public session, we thank you for coming, and we hope it was useful. For those of you who are here for the full shebang, we are going to retire upstairs for a reception and some dinner. Thank you.